You think you are resting when your mind goes quiet, but your brain is most active during the moments you believe you are doing nothing. Not in the way you might expect, not churning through problems or planning tomorrow. Active in a way that neuroscientists describe as a default mode, which is a neutral term for something that does not sound neutral at all when you understand what it actually means. And that's where this becomes strange. Because the thing your brain is doing when you are supposedly at rest looks almost identical to what it does when you are deeply engaged in the most demanding tasks you can perform, except it's doing it without your permission and without you having any idea it's happening at all. I came across this while reading about sleep disorders, which had nothing to do with any of this. A study about insomnia and REM cycles, something completely unrelated to brain networks. And then I made one connection about what the researchers meant when they said the brain remains surprisingly active during periods of rest, and I was suddenly 3 hours in and the original insomnia paper was open in another tab that I never went back to. What stopped me was a question that seemed almost too simple to be the thing that nobody had properly answered. If your brain is as active during rest as it is during focused work, then what exactly do you mean when you say you are resting? I'm still not sure I have answered it. I have gotten closer, I think, but closer to a hard question is not the same as close. Here's what I want to do. First, I'm going to show you what most people believe about rest. And I want to be clear that what most people believe is not wrong. It's just incomplete in a specific direction. Second, what the neuroscience actually shows, which contains what most people believe the way a larger shape contains a smaller one. The smaller one is still there, still true, but it is not the whole picture. And third, the part that is missing from most discussions, the part that exists not because anyone is concealing it, but because it requires accepting an answer that does not feel like an answer at all. That's where this gets difficult. That's where the discomfort actually starts. The standard account sounds reasonable. Your brain, like any organ, needs breaks. When you stop working, when you close your eyes, when you let yourself drift, your brain downshifts. It enters a kind of low power mode. Less activity, lower energy consumption, quieter. This is rest. This is what rest should look like. A decrease, a dimming, a settling into something approaching blankness. The brain earns its rest the way your muscles earn rest after exertion. You work, you stop working, you recover. The gradient makes sense. The causation is clear. Rest is simply the inverse of activity, and activity is the state you want to minimize during actual rest. That account was reasonable for a long time. For most of human history, it was the only account available. You couldn't look inside someone's skull and watch the neurons fire. You could only infer what was happening based on behavior. A person lying still, breathing slowly, eyes closed, that looked like rest. So rest must be a kind of quiet, and quiet must mean less, not more. Then, in the late 1990s, neuroimaging got good enough to do something unexpected. Scientists started scanning people's brains while they performed tasks. They wanted to see which brain regions lit up when people did focused work. Pay attention, they tell the subjects. Solve this puzzle, make this decision, answer this question. And sure enough, certain areas of the brain showed increased electrical activity. The signal got stronger. The images showed bright spots where the neurons were working harder. But here's where something strange happened, something the researchers did not expect. While those regions lit up during the task, other regions dimmed. Different parts of the brain that had been active became less active. And the remarkable thing was not that this happened, it was that it kept happening. Every task produced the same pattern. Specific regions would activate and other specific regions would deactivate. It was as if the brain had a default state, and whenever you ask it to do something, it switched modes. One neuroscientist named Marcus Reichel became curious about that default state itself. What was the brain actually doing when it was not asked to do anything? So he put people in a scanner, told them to simply let their minds wander, close their eyes and relax. No task, no instructions, just be. And what he found was that the regions that dimmed during focused work lit up during rest. The deactivated areas became activated. The quiet regions became loud. The brain during rest was not entering a low power mode at all. It was switching to a different high power mode, a different kind of intense activity just directed inward instead of outward. Rachel called this the default mode of brain function. 2 years later, researchers at Stanford mapped the regions involved more precisely. They discovered that these areas were not scattered randomly through the brain. They were interconnected. They formed a network, a coherent system of regions that worked together. They called it the default mode network, or DMN. And that term is important because it changes what you are actually talking about. It's not just that parts of your brain are active during rest. It's that during rest, your brain organizes itself into a specific integrated system, the same way it organizes itself into a different integrated system when you are solving a problem. Your brain doesn't have an off switch. It has a switch that changes modes, which brings me to what the research actually shows. And this is where things diverge from what most people think. The default mode network is not simply a network that turns on during downtime. That's the incomplete version. The more complete version, the one supported by 2 decades of research, is that the DMN is involved in a specific category of mental work that looks nothing like external task performance, but involves just as much neural activity. This is not a reduction in effort. It is a redirection of effort. What kind of mental work? Well, the regions in this network are the ones involved in self-reflection, memory recall, imagining future scenarios, thinking about other people, and something called autobiographical processing. That last term means creating and maintaining the narrative of your own life. Who you are, where you have been, what your experiences mean, how they connect to each other. When you are resting, when your mind wanders, this is what your brain is doing. It is not quiet. It is engaged in what might be the most complex cognitive task you perform at all. It is running a continuous simulation of yourself across time. And here's where the rupture becomes visible. Because if you sit with this for a moment, it means that your understanding of rest is not just incomplete. It is inverted. You are not resting when your mind goes quiet. You are resting while your brain works intensely, but works on different problems. The standard account treats rest as the absence of mental activity. The accurate account treats rest as a different category of mental activity entirely. One that your brain actually needs because, and this is the part that is usually missing, because this internal work is not optional. This is not something you do because you want to. This is something your brain has to do. Your brain must simulate itself continuously. It must maintain the narrative. It must integrate memories with current understanding. It must run the model of who you are and where you are located in relation to other people and future possibilities. If it does not do this work, the rest of your brain falls apart. There was a researcher, I'm trying to recall who, I may be misremembering this detail, but the specific origin matters less than the finding itself. Who pointed out that the default mode network is more active in the evening and less active in the morning. This was not what they expected. The assumption was that rest would be most active when you were most tired, or that rest would be uniformly distributed across all states of being at rest. But it turns out the network follows a pattern that mirrors memory consolidation, which is the process your brain uses to turn the day's experiences into long-term memories, to integrate them with your existing knowledge, to weave them into the narrative that is you. Your brain does not do this work during the day. It cannot. The external task system is too dominant, so it waits. It waits until evening when you finally stop doing external things, and then it does the work it has been deferring all day. It takes everything that happened and asks, what did this mean for me? How does this fit with who I already am? What should I remember and what can I let go? Now I need to address something you might be thinking at this point. You might be thinking that, sure, the brain is active during rest, but active is a relative term. Maybe the default mode network is humming along, but surely it is using less energy than when you are taking an exam or making a difficult decision. The external task would still require more metabolic cost, more glucose, more blood flow, more actual effort. You would be right to think that in many circumstances, you would also be wrong about how right you are, because metabolically, the default mode network during rest uses roughly as much energy as the external task system uses during focused work. Not in the same direction, not in the same way, but in the same quantity. Your brain does not coast during rest. It powers down one system and powers up another system of similar magnitude. You replace one kind of cognitively expensive work with a different kind of cognitively expensive work. The energy budget barely moves, which means rest is not actually a state of low effort. It is a state of redirected effort. And if rest is not what you thought it was, then the question of what rest actually does for you becomes harder than it appeared, because the benefit cannot be simple recovery. You are not recovering by doing less. You are recovering by doing something different. But different how exactly? And why would doing something different, something just as metabolically expensive as what you were doing before, why would that count as recovery at all? This is where most of the research stops and most of the frameworks become vague. Scientists will tell you that rest is restorative, that it serves memory consolidation, that it helps with creativity, that it is necessary for emotional regulation. All of this is true. But the mechanism remains unusual, because what the default mode network appears to be doing during rest is not recovery in the sense of repair. It is recovery in the sense of integration. Your brain is not fixing anything. It is connecting things. It is taking the discrete experiences of the day and weaving them into a continuous narrative. It is solving the problem that consciousness itself poses. How do you maintain a coherent sense of self when you are constantly receiving new information about the world and about yourself? I think the moment I understood this was actually the moment I realized I had misunderstood rest for my entire life. Because I had always thought of rest as a state of minimal consciousness, a kind of stepping back from the effort of being aware. But it turns out rest is the state in which consciousness is most actively engaged in the work of being a continuous, coherent self. During focused external work, you suspend much of this self-referential processing. You narrow your consciousness to the task. You allow the sense of self to recede. You become less self-aware, not more, which is why flow states feel so good. They are states in which the constant narrative maintenance work gets paused, in which you get a break from the relentless effort of being a unified self across time. And then you stop the external task, you close your eyes, and your brain immediately goes back to work on the thing it was put on hold. It reconstructs the self. It weaves the new experience into the old narrative. It updates the model of who you are in light of what just happened. And this feels like rest because you are no longer doing external problem solving. But it feels like rest for a misleading reason. It feels like rest because you stopped being conscious of yourself. You stopped monitoring your external performance, but your brain did not stop working. It just switched what it was working on. This is where the discomfort gets more acute, because it means that every moment you have ever felt genuinely at rest, your brain was doing exactly what it said it was doing, but not in the way you understood. Your brain was indeed taking care of something you could not consciously access, but that something was not simple restoration. It was the incredibly complex work of maintaining you as a continuous entity across time. It was performing a surgery on the self, constantly adjusting the architecture, constantly integrating new information into the old structure, constantly asking, who am I now, given what just happened, given what I remember, given what I anticipate. The default mode network was not given that name as a neutral descriptor. It was named that because it is the network your brain defaults to when it is not being suppressed by an external task. It is the network's preferred state, and perhaps that is the observation that changes everything, because it means that from the perspective of your own brain, external task work is the aberration. Rest is not an earned state that you get permission to enter after you have done your job. Rest is the default. Rest is where your brain wants to be. External work is what requires your brain to constantly suppress its own preferences. Most of our modern life is built on the opposite assumption. We treat the external task as the main event and rest as the intermission. We treat consciousness directed toward the world as the important state, and consciousness directed inward as a kind of waste. We say we are spacing out or daydreaming as though the default mode network is not doing anything significant when it is left unsupervised. We interrupt it constantly. We check our phones during moments of rest. We fill the silence with music or podcasts. We don't just fail to rest. We actively prevent our brains from entering the state they prefer. We suppress the default mode network continuously, and we are not entirely sure what the costs of that suppression are yet. But early research suggests they are not trivial. Depression, anxiety, attention disorders, rumination, the same network that enables the positive work of memory integration and self-narrative construction, when it runs unchecked, when it becomes hyperactive and unregulated, produces the kinds of mental states we would do almost anything to escape from. So rest is not actually what you thought it was. You cannot rest in the sense of genuinely entering the state your brain prefers, while also checking your phone. You cannot rest while your conscious attention is directed outward at external stimulation, even if that stimulation feels passive. The default mode network requires what amounts to solitude of the internal sort, an absence of external task demands. But it also requires something more subtle. It requires the permission to let your brain do what it actually wants to do, which is to turn inward and do the work that actually matters for your continuity as a person. That work looks like daydreaming from the outside. It looks like unproductive space, but the productivity is internal. The product is you. I suspect that understanding this is what changes the way you actually rest. Because the moment you understand that the default mode network is doing essential work, rest stops feeling like time off from real activity and starts feeling like the space in which the most essential activity occurs. It stops feeling like a guilty indulgence, lying in bed with your mind wandering, staring out a window while your thoughts roam, and starts feeling like a biological necessity, not an optional luxury, not a break from the important work, the work itself. But understanding that creates a new discomfort, because you are now stuck with a question that research has not yet fully solved. And this is the question I keep coming back to. If rest is the state in which your brain does its most essential internal work, and if that work requires uninterrupted access to the default mode network. And if almost all of modern life involves continuously suppressing the default mode network, then the question becomes not how to rest better, but whether we have the capacity to rest at all anymore. Whether the constant external stimulation has damaged our ability to let our brains do what they actually need to do. There is a study that shows the default mode network becomes hyperactive in certain conditions, and these are the conditions where rumination happens, where anxiety spirals, where depression deepens. The brain, unable to exert external task control, unable to direct consciousness toward the world, retreats entirely into the self-referential space. The narrative maintenance system runs wild, reviewing the past obsessively, catastrophizing the future, analyzing the self mercilessly. This is not rest. This is the opposite of rest. This is the default mode network in the absence of balance. And it suggests that whatever rest actually is, it is not simply let the default mode network run unchecked. Rest is the balanced state in which both systems work well. Task focus when needed, self-referential integration when needed, the ability to move between them without getting stuck in either one, which means genuine rest, the kind that actually serves you, requires a very specific condition that we have made almost impossible. You need the external stimulation to stop. You need the task demands to ease. You need your brain to know that it is safe to stop exerting that suppression. And then you need to let the default mode network do its work without interruption. Not for 5 minutes while you think about your to-do list, but for real duration, long enough for the narrative maintenance work to actually complete, for the memories to integrate, for the self to update, for the discomfort to actually settle. I came to this thinking about rest as something I was failing at, that I was bad at relaxing, that my mind would not shut up, that I could not achieve that blankness I associated with true rest. Now, I think I was chasing the wrong thing the entire time. I was trying to achieve a state of low brain activity when what I actually needed was a state of redirected brain activity. I was trying to make my brain do nothing when what my brain actually needs is permission to do the thing it genuinely wants to do, which is to work on me, to make sense of my life, to integrate my experiences, to maintain the continuity of being a person across time. The moment you understand that rest stops being something you have to achieve through effort, it becomes something that happens when you stop interfering with what is already happening, when you put your phone down, when you actually stop working, when you sit for long enough that your brain gives up on the possibility of an external task and finally admits what it has wanted to do all along. It wants to think about you, not in the way you fear, not in the way of anxiety and rumination, but in the way of integration, assembly, the slow work of being a self. So I am back where I started, more or less. The question of what rest is, the question of whether you're actually getting it, the question of what happens in the moments you believe you are doing nothing. I understand it better now in the ways that can be made precise. I understand it less in the ways that cannot. The mechanisms are clearer. The cost of violating them is starker. But the fundamental fact remains opaque, which is this: your brain is never actually at rest. It is only ever switching modes. And you have been calling the switch a rest for so long that you have forgotten to ask whether the place you switch to is actually the place you need to be. The discomfort does not resolve, it deepens instead.